Strong winds on the way for tomorrow. A weather alert will be in effect. I'm timing out the impact hour by hour.
State leaders at odds on the crime fight.
Lawmakers have moved radically the other direction to be soft on crime.
We look into the next bill on the table and dig into the history of legislation targeting violent offenders. Days after a city council committee rejected the mayor's pick for city administrator in a fiery hearing, she's approved unanimously. What's behind the change of course? A manhunt for a former aide to Governor Hogan. What U.S. Marshals are saying after he failed to show up for his federal trial. Nearly a 500% increase in violent crime in Baltimore's Central District. What we're learning about a double shooting in the area, leaving one man dead.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 10.
Fox 45 News demanding answers from city and state leaders about what they're doing to solve some of the biggest issues facing the city, crime and education.
And we're also taking a closer look at a change of course from the Baltimore City Council when it comes to the mayor's pick for city administrator. Good evening, I'm Kai Jackson.
And I'm Mary Bubala. We begin, though, with the potential for some intense wind in our area tomorrow that also could lead to some flooding.
And that's the reason why we're on weather alert right now. Let's go to Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers with more. Jonathan.
Yeah, that wind-driven flooding is gradually ebbing. We've actually canceled all flood advisories for the Chesapeake Bay, but now the winds themselves are going to come up. They're going to switch direction out of the west and northwest. Wind advisories already posted for the entire area, 2 p.m. tomorrow through 2 a.m. early Wednesday. Notice the winds. They're not too bad yet, but what happens into tomorrow is a big difference. By tomorrow morning, winds up to about 20, 25. And it looks like it gets worse from there on out, maybe 20, 30 miles an hour, sustained, some gusts up to 40 to 50, trees down potentially, travel problems. I'm going to break it all down for you coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
Jonathan, thank you. Stay with Fox 45 News and our team of meteorologists tracking the next weather maker through the night. Tune in to Fox 45 Morning News starting at 4:30. Justin Chambers will tell you what you need to know before you head out the door.
Well, a major change of course from the Baltimore City Council when it comes to Mayor Brandon Scott's pick for city administrator. This is what happened during a hearing on the nomination on Thursday, just 4 days ago.
We have failed our constitutional duty to the citizens in the charter of this city. I am off and I'm tired.
This city, it's in disarray. This vote is not about you.
Well, today, the full council unanimously approved Leach's confirmation with no discussion.
All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The recommendation is confirmed.
Fox 45's Jeff Abel joins us now with a closer look at the change in the council. Jeff?
That's right. It was just 4 days ago when a council committee rejected the mayor's nominee for city administrator. But today they called a second meeting and unanimously approved it.
Congratulations. Ms. Leach, you advance.
In less than 10 minutes, the same committee that rejected the mayor's nominee last week today approved her.
I think you have done a outstanding job in your role as a deputy mayor.
I've found you to be a brilliant, dedicated, hardworking public servant.
I'd like if you could explain.
It was a far different tone than the one that erupted during last week's meeting when the same committee voted 4-2 to reject Faith Leach as the city's new administrator.
I am off and I'm tired. And I'm being frank, colleagues. While I may respect you in the sense of this chamber, you have violated the trust of this chamber and the people of Baltimore.
I will formally apologize to this committee for my decorum.
Today, the same committee approved Leach's appointment after a weekend of discussions with the mayor's office.
This was about concerns with the administration, how the office has been structured, and I'm confident after the conversations that we've had over the weekend with the mayor directly, myself, with you and others, that we can hopefully work through those concerns.
They were mad at the mayor. They wanted to send him a message and they sent it. It was the 2x4 to the back of his head.
It's not the first time council members have complained about being left out of major city decisions. Last month, council members complained they were left in the dark over a multi-million-dollar deal signed by the mayor, which gave broad control of the city's conduit system to BG&E.
One way or another, it is incumbent on Mayor Scott to really work on the relationship with the city council and to really build trust. Because right now, I do not think there is much trust.
Political experts say it's too early to determine any long-term fallout from the rift. But for now,
I thank you for your confidence in me.
It appears Faith Leach is on her way to becoming the second administrator in this city's history.
I feel confident that I have the support of this council, and I know that I have the support of the mayor and this administration. But most importantly, what you will see from me is that I will work as hard as I can to get the support and the confidence of the citizens of Baltimore.
Leach's nomination must still be approved by the full council. Kai and Mary?
Jeff, thank you. Well, today, City Councilman Zeke Cohen introduced a bill to restructure the Board of Estimates itself. Jeff, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, Mr. Cohen believes that the mayor simply has too much control over how this city spends its money, and he believes that it's time to take a hard look at changing it. So, Councilman Cohen today is who's considering a run for the city council president seat himself, is calling for the city to establish a 6-person task force which would examine the structure of the Board of Estimates. Cohen says other cities do not have as strong mayor control over their spending boards, and after last month's controversial approval of that conduit deal, Cohen believes it's time to take a hard look at changing it.
Too often we've seen instances of corruption where a mayor has gone down on a scandal that was related to the Board of Estimates, and that's because the mayor controls 3 out of the 5 votes on the BOE.
Cohen says he's yet to decide whether the city should expand the board, shrink the board, or abolish it altogether. We're live. Jeff Abel, Fox 45 News.
Jeff, thank you. We want to know what you think. If elections were held today, would you vote to re-elect Mayor Scott? So far, 97% say no. Head to foxbaltimore.com/vote to weigh in.
Turning now to session 2023. Tomorrow, a state Senate committee will hear the Violent Firearms Offender Act. It's the same bill former Governor Larry Hogan pushed for years, but it hadn't passed. Fox 45's Keith Daniels is looking into that bill and what the future could hold for it this year. Keith.
Well, Kai, in a recent interview with Fox 45 News, the governor said one of his biggest regrets before leaving office was not getting that Violent Firearms Offender bill passed. But tonight there could be new life, or maybe not. In Baltimore City, the numbers are trending in the right direction. As of Monday morning, fatal and non-fatal shootings down compared to this time last year, but still on pace as seen in 2021, which means the city could see more than 300 lives lost to violence for a 9th year in a row. And Baltimore is not the only place seeing increased violent crime, namely those involving juveniles.
6 murders this year in the city and 2 in Baltimore County.
The ongoing gun violence pushing State Delegate Kathy Szeliga, the Republican from Baltimore County, to urge her colleagues in Annapolis to pass the GOP-backed Violent Firearms Offender Act, a bill which would increase fines and jail time for gun offenders, notably repeat offenders.
This bill makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, in Annapolis, we have a lot of politicians who are soft on crime and actually want to go the other way and say that anyone under 25 shouldn't be charged with a crime.
The Senate is expected to take up the bill Tuesday, a hearing scheduled for the Judicial Committee. The legislation, pushed by former Governor Larry Hogan, passed in the Senate the past 2 years, but each time stalled in the House. Hogan last week telling Fox 45 News why he thinks this year might be different. A change fueled, he says, by City State's Attorney Ivan Bates, who campaigned on getting tougher on crime.
The General Assembly is just so far out of touch with their constituents. We now have a state's attorney in Baltimore City, Ivan Bates, who seems to want to focus on violent crime and who is supporting some of the positive measures.
Meanwhile, when pressed recently about if his chamber could back the GOP-backed bill, Senate President Bill Ferguson, a Democrat from Baltimore City, could not give a firm yes or no.
I support. I think we're having conversations across both chambers about what might be feasible. There's a lot more work that has to go to make sure that we have real safe communities.
And it's time for the legislature to really get serious about crime before more young people are shot and murdered.
Well, it's Senate Bill 744. That committee hearing is set for 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We're live tonight. Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
Keith, thank you. This just in, the Senate has approved the Gun Safety Act 31-16 by a vote. That bill would restrict where legal gun owners with a wear and carry permit can bring their weapons. Now, the bill prevents them from carrying a weapon within 100 feet of a public space. Supporters of the bill say it will cut back on gun violence. However, critics argue it will only lead to less protection for law-abiding citizens. You can find more on that bill on our website, foxbaltimore.com.
And you can make your voice heard. Scan the QR code right there on your screen to contact your local state delegates and senators. It takes you to our website where we have put together the phone numbers and email addresses for them. Baltimore's public schools ranking lowest in the state, according to recent report cards from the Maryland Department of Education.
Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost took those education concerns to Governor Wes Moore and shares his thoughts.
The governor isn't shying away from saying some results in these classrooms are not acceptable, but he's also stopping short of saying the state should launch an investigation into city schools. The state report card, sobering for many students and families in Baltimore City schools. The Maryland Education Department reporting Baltimore has the most schools in the state performing the worst. Rated on a star system, City Schools has just one 5-star school, 29 schools with 1 star, another 83 with just 2 stars. That's 112 schools in Baltimore with a 1 or 2 star rating, meaning 75% of schools in Baltimore City are struggling.
It's quite alarming. You know, we should have some type of urgency around fixing this issue.
That urgency seems to be lacking. City School CEO Dr. Sonia Santelice is issuing a statement following the report card, saying the poor performance is not surprising. Most city leaders haven't said much about the grades released from the state. So Monday, we questioned Governor Wes Moore about what he's going to do. Do you think the state should launch an investigation into the city school system?
Well, I think one thing needs to happen is we've got to move and take this seriously. I mean, watching the kind of results that we have with education for our students, it's infuriating because we know we've got to move faster. We've got to do more.
The governor not committing to an investigation.
But we also know that what's happening on the state level with the Board of Education, that we've got some real work we've got to do, and everybody's got to have a measure of involvement into that to know that we're going to be transparent and we're going to be accountable.
Right now, investigation, yes or no?
Well, I think that what we have to do from a state perspective is the state needs to continue making sure that people know that we are going to commit to having the proper resources and having the proper supports. We need to make sure that we're holding all of our jurisdictions accountable, local jurisdictions, and also the Board of Education, to make sure that the results that we're seeing right now for so many of our students, they are unacceptable.
Is that level of accountability happening right now?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that from a state perspective, we know that we're going to be working with those local jurisdictions to ensure that there is full transparency about where we are, how we got there, and what is going to be the collective action that we have to take in order to move forward.
The state's report card comes after another bleak look into student success in city classrooms. Fox 45's Project Baltimore reporting 23 schools in the city did not have a student tested able to do math at a grade level. When asked about those math scores, the mayor telling Fox 45 a similar comment to Santelice's statements about the report card.
We knew that this would happen.
These city schools' failures are something many families have seen for themselves. Now the question remains, what, if anything, will change to help students improve? The governor often comes back on points to the Kerwin plan, or the blueprint for Maryland's future. That's the education spending plan that calls for millions of more dollars to be given to classrooms, including Baltimore City. But we also know that city schools already spend more than $20,000 per student annually, making the school system one of the highest spending districts across the country. In the newsroom, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
Well, meanwhile, Governor Moore is doubling down on his proposal to cut funding from the Boost program. Former Governor Larry Hogan created the program to give scholarships to low-income families to send their children to private or charter schools, parochial schools, actually. In light of the state report card, Fox 45 News asked the governor's office if he's still planning to cut $2 million from the program. His office tells us, quote, the governor believes public dollars should be going to public schools. Now, Senate President Bill Ferguson says he is open to funding the Boost program, saying the $10 million the state spends on it is just a fraction of the $7.5 billion Maryland spends on education overall. It is important to note Governor Wes Moore himself intended private school.
Still ahead on Fox 45 News at 10 o'clock tonight. A former aide to Governor Larry Hogan still missing after he fails to show up for his federal trial today. What we know about what authorities are calling a manhunt. Homicides are up 500% in Baltimore City, in the city's Central Police District. Fox 45 News is demanding answers and examining the economic toll it could take on Baltimore. And our coverage of the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank continues at 10:30 tonight. Why some experts are blaming the company's so-called progressive priorities for its downfall. U.S. Marshals confirm a manhunt is underway for Roy McGrath, a former aide to Governor Larry Hogan, accused of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the state while he led the Maryland Environmental Service.
That's right. The U.S. Marshals Service calling McGrath a fugitive. They tell us Baltimore and Washington, D.C. agents are working right now to find him.
Now, McGrath was set to travel to Baltimore last night from Florida. Florida law enforcement officials went to McGrath's home in Naples for a welfare check today. They told our Mackenzie Frost he wasn't there. His attorney says he spoke with McGrath last night and says there didn't seem to be any issues.
We had a very engaged conversation regarding what was going to be happening today and a variety of issues that we have been discussing over time. And I sensed nothing that would cause me concern about Roy's plans for today.
Well, the trial is now delayed and the jury was dismissed this morning. As part of his pretrial release, McGrath did have to give up his passport. If he's found, he will be arrested and brought to Baltimore for trial. Fox 45 News will continue to follow this developing story, bring you any updates as they come into our newsroom. Download the Fox 45 News app to make sure that you don't miss any breaking developments in this case and others. In
a city like Baltimore, many children are met with crime right outside their front doors. Poverty is sadly what many of them know. And when it's been that way for generations, it can be difficult to see a future.
In 2022, Project Baltimore's Chris Papp sat down with Dr. Ben Carson, who says he is proof that where you begin isn't where you always end up.
Growing up surrounded by violence, Dr. Ben Carson thought that he would be dead by the time he was 20. Instead, he became a world-renowned pediatric brain surgeon at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And now he's trying to prove that his success was not a fluke. Project Baltimore sat down with Dr. Ben Carson at his home in Northern Virginia, a home very different from the one he grew up in.
And I remember very vividly thinking that I would probably never live to be more than 20 years old, 25 at the most, because that's what I saw around me.
Carson's life began in poverty 70 years ago, surrounded by crime and violence in Detroit and later Boston.
Both of my older cousins were killed. It was an awful environment.
An environment his mother refused to allow him to accept.
She just would not allow us to be victims.
Carson's mother was not highly educated. She cleaned houses to support the family. But Carson says she taught him to love reading. And in books, he found an escape.
And I hated poverty. After I began to recognize that I could control my own economic circumstances by my achievement, I didn't mind being poor anymore, because I knew it was only temporary.
And he was right. Carson would go on to graduate from Yale University and become a world-renowned pediatric brain surgeon at Johns Hopkins. After a nearly 30-year medical career, he retired in 2013. 3 years later, he ran for president and later served 4 years as the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He's written best-selling books. In 2008, Carson received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor.
As you reflect on your life, your experiences, your successes, your failures, how do you frame that in your mind?
Well, I ask myself, how did all that happen? Was it a fluke? Or is it something that can be disseminated and make a useful situation for thousands, if not millions, of young people?
In some ways, Carson's childhood was a valuable lesson. It taught him insight into what life is like for many young people in Baltimore.
It makes you frightened and always weary where you go looking around, trying to figure out if something bad's going to happen to you.
Poverty and violence can be detrimental to a young life. Trauma can impact a child's ability to learn.
When you see people who are highly successful, in most cases, they have a family or they have someone outside of the family who took a special interest in them.
Carson began doing for others what his mother did for him. Offer the gift of reading. In 2000, Carson began opening reading rooms at schools and community centers around Baltimore, then the entire country, focusing on neighborhoods with high levels of poverty, where children have little, if any, access to books. The 250th Carson Reading Room just opened in Texas. Meanwhile, the Carson Scholars Program has awarded more than $6 million in college scholarships. And Carson's latest initiative, American Cornerstone, is a nonprofit focused on improving education for all Americans.
I have put so much emphasis on it for other young people because I know that's what changes the trajectory of a person's life.
Carson believes that because he says it happened to him, from where his life began to where he sits now.
And if you give a person in this country a good education, it doesn't matter where they came from. They can come from the ghetto. They can come from Appalachia. It doesn't matter where they come from. They can write their own ticket.
I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
Baltimore Central Police District, a hub for business and entertainment, is seeing a rise in homicides. We take a look at the numbers and the economic toll it could take.
And we are under weather alert on Tuesday because a major storm system across the Northeast is going to be tossing some pretty big winds our way. Wind advisories in effect, and look at that weather maker, huge. Rain, wind, snow. Around here, maybe a couple of wind-blown flakes. But overall, again, look at the winds coming up tomorrow afternoon. Wind advisories in effect. Could see some winds up to about 40, 50 miles an hour. I'm going to let you know what the impacts are going to be for you on your commutes. My Weather Authority forecast.
Taking a look right now at the Fox box on the top left, the curriculum for first-year medical students at Indiana University in Bloomington includes a class about inclusive health care. The school is outlining when students should use inclusive terminology like saying people with cervixes rather than women. The university efforts align with those of the American Medical Association.
Top right, a debate over a new film course at a California high school. The class places emphasis on the history of marginalized people in Hollywood. Some parents claim the language in the class aligns with a critical race theory. The school board did remove some language from the curriculum, but will keep the class.
On the bottom left, Ukrainians in the United States escape their war-torn country and will be allowed to stay in the U.S. longer. The Biden administration renewed the authorization today. It was set to expire soon.
Bottom right, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has been discharged from the hospital. He is now recovering at an inpatient facility. He was hospitalized last Wednesday after he fell at a private dinner event.
Be the first to know about breaking news by signing up for News on the Go. Go to foxbaltimore.com and click on Mobile Alerts Sign Up under the Station tab. You can also download the Fox 45 app for your smartphone. Search WBFF in your app store.
The public one step closer to seeing the report detailing sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The new developments today and what one advocate says he hopes it brings.
As financial experts unpack what led up to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, some critics say the bank's leaders took their eye off the ball. I'm Kayla Gaskins in Washington.
Well, we're following three big stories at 10:30.
The financial world is unpacking the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, why some say the company's policies are to blame.
An organization representing Maryland's school board pushing back on a bill that would withhold funding if local boards don't comply with state-approved education requirements. We hear from both sides of the debate.
A weekend double shooting in Baltimore's Central District turns deadly. How it points to a bigger problem.
And we begin there. According to online statistics, the Central District is seeing a 500% increase in homicides compared to this time last year.
FOX45's Alexa Ashwell has the story.
The Baltimore Police Department has identified this victim as 32-year-old Juan Hill. The department's still piecing together what they believe led up to this shooting. This case, the latest homicide to occur in the Central District. A late Sunday afternoon in Baltimore's McCullough Homes community interrupted by gunfire. Here on Pennsylvania Avenue, police respond to reports of a shooting. At the scene, investigators detailing officers find a man with gunshot wounds to his chest and a woman with a gunshot wound to her head. Both are rushed to an area hospital where the man is pronounced dead. At the scene, officers establishing a perimeter in between a market and a church as onlookers watch in anguish, and investigators work to determine who shot the victims and why.
It's quite unfortunate when you think that there's a double shooting on a Sunday.
Reverend Al Hathaway on the violence. His church just a few blocks from where this homicide happened. Statistics from the Baltimore Police Department showing as of the beginning of this month, homicides are up 500%. And non-fatal shootings up 9% in the city's Central District compared to this time last year.
If we're going to really curtail violence, we've got to really up the ante in terms of investment. People need to work. People need jobs. We need to make certain that people in these same communities have access to quality education.
Other neighborhoods within the city's Central District include downtown Baltimore. Online statistics show there have been at least 170 crimes reported downtown So far this year, the majority aggravated assaults followed by robberies. That's more than 2 crimes a day in the heart of the city.
Right now, the direction is not a positive one.
Economist Aniban Basu weighing in on the economic aspects of this criminality.
The pandemic, remote work, and other things, online shopping, other kinds of things that took off and have hurt central business districts around the country, but particularly in a place like Baltimore, where also there is this criminality, and which is just another reason for people not to go downtown, not to go to the central district.
I asked Baltimore police what they believe has contributed to this spike in homicides within the Central District. I'm still waiting to hear back. As for this latest case, no arrests have been made. No suspect information has been provided. Alexa Ashwell, Fox 45 News.
2 people were hurt in 2 separate shootings within an hour in Northeast Baltimore. The first happened around noon. Police say a 16-year-old was shot in the hand in an attempted robbery. The second happened along Polk Street an hour later. You can see that scene on the right side of your screen. Police say a 32-year-old man was shot multiple times. His condition is unclear, but homicide detectives are investigating.
The Maryland House approves a framework that would allow recreational marijuana to be sold as soon as July. Under the bill, current medical dispensaries would be able to have a dual license to also sell recreational marijuana products. Priority for licenses is set to be given to minority owners affected by past marijuana laws. That bill is now heading to the Senate.
An organization representing Maryland school boards is pushing back against a bill that would withhold funding if local boards don't comply with state-approved education policies. Kelly Lynn with our Sinclair sister station in Washington has the story.
A representative from the Maryland Association of Boards of Education tells me the bill severely limits the decision-making of local school boards, superintendents, and teachers. House Bill 119 was originally written to address health education in Maryland schools.
We're seeing a gradual concern with erosion of adherence to standards that are set by the state.
Now the amended version of the bill, which recently passed in the House of Delegates, covers a multitude of subjects from math to social studies to history and the arts.
What we were trying to do with this piece of legislation was ensure that the standards that are set by the State Board of Education through their statewide framework were adhered to by the local school systems.
According to the new version of the proposed legislation, if the state superintendent determines a county board is not following State Board of Education policy or is authorizing students to opt out of instruction in a way that is not approved by the state board, the state superintendent can direct the state controller to withhold funds from the county board.
10% and ultimately another 10% of the state aid to education for that local school system until they comply with, again, every element of the state standards.
John Woolhams of the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, or MABE, says his organization, which represents all of the state's 24 school boards, strongly opposes the bill.
It would be a new era, if you will, of statewide absolute compliance and adherence to these state content standards, unprecedented and of great concern to school systems who are continuously struggling with limited resources.
Woolhams encourages his members and others to call their state representatives and urge them to vote against the legislation, which has now moved to the Maryland Senate. Lamb is the sponsor of the Senate version of the bill. He says the next step is to amend it so that it aligns with the House version. Reporting for Fox 45, I'm Kelly Lynn.
Governor Wes Moore announces Maryland's adoption of the multi-state advanced clean cars rule, a step in the state's plan to improve air quality and combat the effects of climate change. The state is moving quickly to adopt the regulation, which requires manufacturers to continuously increase the share of electric vehicles they sell, reaching 100% of passenger car and truck sales by model year 2035. MDE will follow the process for a proposed regulation, which includes the opportunity for public comment to allow for the regulation to take effect in September.
Well, you can make your voice heard. Scan the QR code on your screen to contact your local state delegates and senators. It'll take you to our website where we have listed their phone numbers and email addresses.
New developments in the state attorney general's report On the history of sexual abuse in the Catholic Archdiocese of Baltimore, the AG's office delivered its proposed redactions to the court today. That report details the way clergy and other officials sexually abused more than 600 children and young adults over 8 decades, as well as the church's efforts to cover up the abuse and silence victims. On Fox 45 News at 5 o'clock, we spoke with David Lorenz of SNAP Maryland, a support group for victims of sexual abuse by clergy. He says he hopes the report will encourage other victims to come forward.
And that's really what I'm looking for, is that this will reach out to other victims who have remained silent out of guilt and shame and fear, and that they will begin their journey towards healing.
It is not clear when the report will be released to the public. When it is, Fox 45 News will have full coverage on air and on our website, foxbaltimore.com.
Well, stocks closed mixed today following the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. It was the most volatile day of trading this year. And now the Federal Reserve has some tough choices to make. Before this weekend's turmoil in the banking industry, the Fed suggested interest rates were likely to go higher than first anticipated. The bank failures are raising questions about that approach as high interest rates jeopardize investments. One former Fed official says there's no easy answer.
If they back off for any length of time, inflation will probably reignite, and then we'll have this problem again down the road. So they're going to have to face the fact that we're going to have some rough times here, and they need to leave interest rates to where higher until we get this inflation back down.
As the financial world unpacks the failures leading up to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, critics point to the company's priorities, a catalyst to the downfall. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has the story.
For 4 decades, Silicon Valley Bank catered to the tech world, funding companies like Pinterest, ZipRecruiter, and Shopify. On Friday, the institution collapsed.
This is the biggest failure since 2008.
Home Depot co-founder Bernie Marcus arguing the bank's leaders took their eye off the ball.
Their own people should have spotted this, but they didn't. They were too busy woke. They were too busy playing the woke game.
Ahead of the downfall, those at the top pushing a series of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
This bank, they're so concerned with DEI and politics and all kinds of stuff.
A company communication from last August outlined goals for increasing the number of women and minorities in senior leadership.
Not hiring the brightest people, but hiring people based on what they look like or where they fall in the social register. A bank is there for one reason, to make investments and to make sure their investments are right and smart.
Marcus expanding on his ideas related to the harm of woke culture in his new book, Kick Up Some Dust.
If you don't make money, nobody can survive. If you don't make money, you can't employ people.
Republican Congressman James Comer blaming SVB's fall on progressive investments.
They were one of the most woke banks in their quest for the ESG type policy and investing, and there are consequences for bad Democrat policy.
Most experts say the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes are the main reason for the bank's collapse, and some on the left, like Senator Bernie Sanders, blaming former President Donald Trump's policies loosening regulations on smaller banks like SVB. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
And that brings us to our national question of the day. How do you feel about your financial future? More confident or less confident? To answer, use the phone. Scan that QR code on your screen and answer for us, please.
An unprecedented surge of migrants putting stress on the border. The efforts in Washington right now to reevaluate America's current policies.
And we are under weather alert on Tuesday overnight. The breezes gradually pick up, taking wind chills down to about 20 degrees by 7 a.m. when you wake up. Temperatures falling down to just above freezing and maybe a scattered flurry or two. I'll let you know when wind advisories